If you enjoy your weekends, you owe a quiet debt to a man you've probably never heard of, because the two-day weekend wasn't created by politicians or unions. It was shaped by an industrial titan with the unlikely reputation of being the kindest boss in America. His name was George Westinghouse, and the story of how this gentle engineer outmaneuvered robber barons, battled Thomas Edison, and treated his workers like family is almost forgotten. Today, we're bringing it back. Before he lit cities and stopped trains, George Westinghouse was a restless teenager in New York, bored in the classroom, fascinated by the tools in his father's machinery shop. He'd sneak in, take things apart, and reassemble them in new ways. Those hours in the shop, he'd later say, were his real education. Then, at 15, the Civil War tore America apart. Westinghouse enlisted the moment he turned 17. He wasn't a natural soldier, but the war taught him urgency. Problems weren't theories, they had to be solved, fast. After the war, he tried college. It lasted 2 months. The president told him he'd be better off cultivating his genius elsewhere. So he walked out of the classroom and into his destiny. At just 19, he earned his first patent. Over the next 5 decades, he'd accumulate over 300 more. On average, one every 6 weeks. But the invention that changed America came early. To understand it, you have to picture the railroads of the 1800s. Long, heavy trains barreling across the country with no reliable way to stop. Braking was done manually by workers called brakemen, who had to sprint across the roofs of moving train cars, twisting levers one by one. It was slow, terrifying, and deadly. Some estimates put the number of brakemen killed or crippled as high as 22,000 a year. Rail accidents were so common that companies simply accepted death as a business expense. Westinghouse didn't. He envisioned a system where a single pull of a lever could stop a train almost instantly. His solution was elegant: a centralized system using compressed air to activate brakes on every car simultaneously. But when he presented it to Cornelius Vanderbilt, the most powerful railroad magnate in America, Vanderbilt laughed him out of the room. "You propose to stop a railroad train with wind?" he scoffed. "I'm too busy to listen to such nonsense." It was a theme in Westinghouse's life. He saw safety and progress, others saw expenses. But then, tragedy struck one of Vanderbilt's own railroads. Suddenly, safety wasn't a luxury. Westinghouse got his chance. He began staging demonstrations across the country. During one famous demo, a horse and carriage stalled on the tracks just as his train approached. Spectators watched in horror as the train hurtled toward disaster. Then, just 4 feet from impact, the conductor pulled the brake. The train shuddered to a miraculous stop. The crowd erupted. Orders flooded in. By the late 1870s, Congress passed the Safety Appliance Act, requiring all trains to adopt air brakes. The law saved countless lives, but Westinghouse wasn't finished. He invented a shock-absorbing gear that made rail travel smoother. A version is still used today. He designed switching systems so foolproof an engineer once said a blind man pulling random levers could stop trains but never cause an accident. This wasn't a man building gadgets to get rich. This was someone engineering a safer world. And his curiosity was only accelerating. Soon, his obsession would move beyond railroads into something far more explosive. Because next, George Westinghouse would drill a 1,500-foot hole into his own backyard and unleash an inferno so massive it would ignite his greatest battle yet, the War of the Currents. Before George Westinghouse became entangled in one of history's fiercest technological wars, he turned his backyard into a spectacle. After buying a quiet Pittsburgh estate called Solitude, he horrified his wealthy neighbors by erecting a towering gas derrick right on the lawn. In the 1800s, natural gas was notoriously dangerous. Wells exploded, pipelines leaked, but Westinghouse wasn't scared. He was intrigued. So he drilled, and he struck gas, a lot of it. To reduce the immense pressure, workers lit a flare, which erupted into a roaring volcanic column of fire visible for miles. Residents flocked from across the city just to see the inferno lighting up the night sky. Westinghouse stood proudly beside his backyard volcano. But he wasn't just playing with fire. In just 2 years, he developed 38 patents for making natural gas safer, inventing gas meters, leak detection systems, and launching his own company. This defined his life. See a problem, engineer a solution, build an industry. Then he found a new obsession: electricity. At the time, the world saw it as a luxury. Westinghouse saw a battleground. Across the country, a rising inventor named Thomas Edison was promoting his electrical system powered by direct current, or DC. Newspapers called him the Wizard of Menlo Park. Wealthy backers like J.P. Morgan poured money into him. But his DC system had a fatal flaw. The electricity weakened after just half a mile. A city would need a power station on practically every block. Westinghouse knew this wasn't scalable for a country as vast as America. He found a better system: alternating current, or AC. Unlike DC, AC could travel hundreds of miles. It could power a nation. Edison was furious. He attacked AC, launching a smear campaign so dark it still shocks historians. He publicly electrocuted animals, dogs, horses, even an elephant, to show AC's power. He helped engineers build the first electric chair, powered by AC. And when asked what to call this new execution, Edison suggested a new word: Westinghouse. The tactic was brutal, and public fear grew. But Westinghouse wasn't alone. A brilliant Serbian immigrant named Nikola Tesla, who had briefly and bitterly worked for Edison, believed in AC. In 1888, he patented the missing piece of the puzzle: an AC induction motor. Westinghouse immediately recognized his genius, bought his patents, and hired him. The war grew uglier. Edison's empire was backed by J.P. Morgan's immense financial power. Then Westinghouse saw a chance to end the war decisively: the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. Lighting the fair meant lighting a miniature city. Whoever won the contract would win the public. Edison's General Electric bid $1.8 million. Westinghouse undercut them with a shocking bid of just under $400,000.
It was a bold, potentially fatal risk for his company, but he won. Enraged, Edison sued, claiming Westinghouse's light bulbs infringed on his patents. A judge agreed. Westinghouse had less than 6 months to invent a completely new type of bulb. He did it. On opening night, when President Grover Cleveland pressed the button, 100,000 incandescent lights exploded into brilliance. AC had won the battle for America's imagination. The final challenge was Niagara Falls, a project so ambitious it was thought impossible. In 1896, Westinghouse and Tesla harnessed the power of the falls, and the world's first major hydroelectric plant sent electricity to Buffalo, New York. Edison's DC system was finished. But victory came with a cost. Years of rapid expansion and fierce competition had strained Westinghouse's empire. And when the U.S. economy collapsed into panic in 1907, he found himself leveraged and vulnerable. Standing in the shadows was J.P. Morgan, a man who had backed Edison, a man who had never forgotten losing the current war. George Westinghouse, the man who lit cities, was about to be forced into a battle he couldn't engineer his way out of.
The Panic of 1907 was a financial earthquake. Banks collapsed, depositors panicked, liquidity dried up overnight. For companies with debt, even great companies, the crisis was merciless. George Westinghouse had spent decades building the future: rail safety, natural gas, electricity. But building the future required massive amounts of capital. His companies borrowed heavily to expand factories, fund research, and compete with titans like Edison. And when the markets froze, lenders wanted their money back immediately. Westinghouse couldn't deliver. Sensing weakness,
The banker J.P. Morgan moved swiftly. He publicly blamed the crisis on George's management. He whispered doubts about the company into Wall Street's ear. He chipped away at confidence, then credit ratings, then valuations. And the effect was devastating. Westinghouse Electric, his proudest creation, was forced into receivership. Soon after, the board dismissed him from the very company he had built from nothing.
Imagine that! You invent life-saving technology, you bring electricity to millions, you build one of America's most important corporations, and then a banker tells you to hand over the keys and go home. But Westinghouse didn't rage. He didn't lash out. He didn't blame anyone. He simply moved on. Despite losing control of his companies, he remained wealthy, worth around $50 million, an enormous sum at the time. But more importantly, he remained inventive. In his final years, he tinkered with new ideas, designing an electric wheelchair shortly before his death. Even in old age, he was still the same young boy from his father's workshop, curious, captivated, building. On March 12, 1914, George Westinghouse passed away. But his legacy didn't end with his death. It evolved. Over the next few decades, the Westinghouse name started appearing on radios, refrigerators, washing machines, products that filled American homes in ways George himself never imagined. Yet, history books rarely capture his true impact. George Westinghouse didn't just light up the modern world. He humanized it. He believed workers deserved dignity. He believed safety was worth investing in. He believed innovation should serve people, not crush them. He built Wilmerding, a company town with electricity, running water, and a hospital, luxuries unheard of for industrial workers. He introduced accident insurance and half-day Saturdays, a benefit that would help form the modern weekend. His factories were some of the safest in the nation. His employees adored him, so much so that when he died, over 50,000 workers raised money to build a bronze monument in his honor. Compared to the ruthless tycoons of his era, George Westinghouse looked like a different species entirely. Where others demanded obedience, he offered opportunity. Where others saw workers as costs, he saw them as human beings. Where others built empires, he built communities. He won battles without becoming a warrior. He changed the world without breaking it. He proved that greatness does not require cruelty. In a time when industrialists often left paths of destruction behind them, George Westinghouse left behind light, safety, comfort, and a two-day weekend that millions now take for granted. And that may be his greatest invention of all. Hey, if you enjoyed this video, don't forget to hit that like button and subscribe to The Business Lens. It really helps us keep creating stories like this one. And let us know in the comments what company, empire, or business figure you'd like us to cover next. We read every suggestion, and your idea might be the next deep dive on this channel. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.